And last, we talked a little bit about continuous monitoring. Again, continuous monitoring is something, I don't want to say new, but in my history of being in information security is quite new. Actually, I've dealt with supply chain quite many years, but continuous monitoring, especially with some of the providers out there offering package solutions to do continuous monitoring, is something that's come on over the last probably 10 years really now. You can do a lot of continuous monitoring with tools that are accessible on the web. You don't have to have a specific provider of continuous monitoring solution. You can do web app scanning, security assessment, surface assessment, DNS, reputation, SSL configuration, and then the last is probably one of the easiest one, cyber news intelligence. That doesn't mean you have to be a dark web expert. You don't necessarily need to go to the dark web. You can find a lot of very valuable information, cyber news, on some of the known bloggers, the likes of Krebs and Bushnayer, or just a hacker forum, hacker news. And it's important to keep informed really, because there is so much going on in the world these days. It's not like if company gets breached, you will hear from it in the mainstream news. So you should really check regularly cyber news as a form of continuous monitoring, really. What else to say on continuous monitoring? It's important as well to understand that it's not the ultimate solution. It's an important solution to have in your arsenal of tools for monitoring your suppliers, getting a good grip on your suppliers from a cybersecurity point of view, but doesn't cover the whole spectrum. It's point in time, and it's important to complement it with assessments like we talked about a little bit earlier on. So typically controls assessments or deep audit, if you can do some audits, in-person audits and things like that. So yeah, that's pretty much what we wanted to cover. And as you can see, we're covering the whole sort of life cycle of supply chain really with this. I'll pause a little bit before I go to where next and remind ourselves of the ISF approach to see if there's any questions, any thoughts from the...
I just had a quick one on the continuous supply chain assurance side of things, Benoit. It's fair to say, right, that the more continuous methods of assurance are also probably have the less depth, right? So the most detail you're ever going to get in terms of assessment is an audit, but that's also the one that's the least continuous. Like you can only ever do those at a maximum like once a year. So there's always got to be that balance between depth of assessment versus the continuous nature of it. So yeah, people need to understand that you can't have continuously really in-depth assessments of suppliers, right?
Thanks, Richard. Yes, that's a very good point. Yeah, it can create a false illusion because typical continuous assessment solutions are about web presence, footprint on the web. So not every organizations have 100% of their assets on the web. So if they don't, then you cannot possibly do have a good view of their security situation.
I think having done some of that research on the continuous supply chain assurance, as I say, a few years ago, but one of the best pieces of advice I saw on that was people don't necessarily mind too much what a particular score is or what the assessment of a continuous, of a security rating is. They wanted to know whether it was going up or down. So it's like, okay, if it was going down, you wanted to know why, and it's a trigger for further assessment. Okay, if that score is dropping, I want to go and do another more in-depth assessment. So it's a good way of kind of keeping track. It's not going to tell you everything. So we've got a question coming in, so thanks for this. So what's your views on platforms where suppliers share the outcome and sometimes even reports of security assessments instead of replying to our own security assessment questionnaires? So is that widely used? Is it useful to assess, to monitor suppliers?
I think the one thing to be cautious with of that approach is how, even with different contracts from the same supplier, how different it can be. So if they're just sending out one general assessment results, it might not be specific to the contract that you're working with. And so I think sometimes asking your own question sets means you can kind of address every single question that is relevant to you and what your business cares about, whereas these ones that are shared across multiple different suppliers tend to be a little bit more general. So I think that's always one thing to keep in mind.
Yeah, that's right. I think there's a balance to be struck again, right? And we have to think from the point of view of both the person who's answering those assessments and those who are providing them. For a lot of big organizations who have multiple customers, right? How many of these assessments are they being given a year? It's into the thousands, right? So there's a limit to what they can provide. Therefore, it's obviously easier for them to provide one and have it reviewed by many. So, but yeah, again, there's only so much you can necessarily do with that if you're sending an assessment yourself. I think good practice for that when sending supplier assessments is probably don't ask the same question twice. Almost, I think, how do we do it? Next time around, okay, we know where the strengths are. Can we probe some of what we think potential weaknesses might be with the next assessment? Does that make sense, Francesca? Is that something we can help with the assessment tools?
Yeah, 100%, especially trying to not to overburden suppliers with the amount of questions that you're asking. So rather than asking for all the requirements from an ISO, for example, or things that will be covered by ISO, a lot of organizations will ask to see the ISO 27001 certificate, and that kind of provides a lot more coverage than asking all those questions individually. So it's also being aware of your supplier's time as well to keep that relationship healthy and productive.
Yeah. Yeah, there's always that human element you need to manage here as well. We forget there's people on either side of these assessments. Yeah, so
let's wrap up maybe, and then we'll take the last question if you don't mind. Yeah.
Yeah, of course.
Yeah. I've just only got one more slide to go, so I just wanted to stay on this slide as well because I think it's important. It links as well to the next question. So again, just to circle back on everything we've covered, and this is our final slide really of the presentation. This is really everything we've covered at ISF for many years, supply chain. Some of these reports were first published in early 2000, really 2010, reviewed, revisited, and then more recently, we've created this amazing tool, the supplier security tool, which I hope some of you members on our Bright Talk are keen users, and if you're not, I would strongly encourage you to access it. It's it's part of the membership, so you can easily access the supplier security tool. So yeah, and we've been looking at ISF this supplier management life cycle from start to finish, and that's why we followed this little structure. And yeah, so we're going to come to the end, and I can see we have this other question. Richard, do you want to go through it?
Yeah, so thanks for this question. It says, so I notice on the ISF Supplier Assurance web app, you have information on external attack surface information for that supplier. So do we get that via third-party integrations, as in from Security Scorecard, etc., or is it a capability of our own platform using VOCINT tooling and checks? So how do you kind of enter that information?
Yeah, so at the moment we have a field for external assessment scores. So if our organizations are using other platforms like Security Scorecard or BitSight, you can collect that score within the tool. It's not currently automated, so it's a manual process, but that does provide the extra flexibility for the organization to add in different scores as well. So it could be scores collected from the procurement team, but it does allow you to keep that information in one centralized location on the supplier security tool.
Thanks, Francesca. Hope that helps. Yeah, and I wanted to row back a bit as well to what you were saying, Benoit, there. The research we've done, I think especially those securing supply chain papers, I think were written in 2013, so before either of our time here. But what's interesting to me is the overall advice, the procurement life cycle hasn't changed that much. The threat landscape is changing, the world is speeding up, but I think that makes the recommendations we have only more important. It's like the world's speeding up, you need to get on with this now, and it's about, we've touched on a lot of it here. It's working with the procurement team. It's working with all the different parts of the business to understand that landscape, work those contractual agreements in, and then kind of monitor and assess security posture throughout the lifetime of the contract, which can be 5-10 years, right? So I think just because it might look old, I think it's still highly relevant. Every time we have these conversations, we kind of think, we addressed this 15 years ago sometimes, and we're still giving the same advice, but it still absolutely holds. There's some basic things you need to do here to tie in with the business. Cool. So I say, if there are any further questions, please do let us know. I mean, we obviously had a few amongst ourselves, and I guess that probably to tie this back to the geopolitical shifts and changes that we see. How often do we think supplier risk assessments should be revisited? Right. So given the pace of change around geopolitics, relationships between different countries, etc. Is that speeding up the way we should do things?
I guess I'll start on this. I think Francesca as well might have views. I think, I mean, it's hard to say. You can just rest on your chair and wait for things to get better. Unfortunately, you have to accelerate your program. You have to, I'd say, identify where the biggest geographical location might impact you, right? There has been a couple of outages out there in the Middle East. So really trying to follow the news. If you know that you have some providers, some operations happening in regions of Middle East, primarily at the moment, this is probably one of the affected region by the geopolitical conflicts. You should be aware of these suppliers. You should reassess them in any way you can. Obviously, you probably possibly can do any physical audits, but reviewing the certificates and you got the likes of the big cloud providers again that have some form of operations in Middle East. You can question them through contracts, through your contacts as well. We haven't mentioned very important to have some good primary contacts at your suppliers. So yes, you should be really on guard. Really, you should be aware of what's happening. Increase the pace, possibly, because obviously we haven't talked about that, but we know that especially large organizations these days have hundreds, if not thousands, of suppliers. So it wouldn't be fair to say you have to increase the cadence and suddenly start assessing your supplier every week, every other day. So I'd say really try to focus on where you feel it's more important, where the most critical suppliers are, and where the geopolitical tensions are most acute.
Yeah, thanks, Benoit. Yeah, I think it goes back to that risk-based approach, right? Who are our critical suppliers, and what do we know about them and the context around them, where they're based, what's the changing threat landscape. So but it goes back to all the stuff you were talking about, Francesca, right? The building up that base of who our key suppliers are in the first place. If you don't have that, it's harder to track or say, okay, a new war has kicked off in the Middle East. There might be one in the Pacific in the next few years, or in East Asia. What do we know about those suppliers? You need to know this in advance, right? Where those suppliers are.
Yeah, that the repository is a really useful way to kind of keep on top of that. And like Benoit said, is keeping on top of the news and the cycles so you can kind of respond to that. I think even if there are set frequencies of how often you should reassess your suppliers, an important thing is to be adaptive to it too. So if there is a sudden change in one part of the world and it does change your supplier security posture, rather than waiting for another year to reassess them, there are measures you can take in the meantime. And I think it's important to have that flexibility in the approach as well.
Yep. Thanks. Another good question coming in. So for instances where change of suppliers might not be feasible or even possible. So, and obviously this can happen depending on the business you're in. Sometimes there's only one supplier can provide one exact thing. What would you recommend as appropriate security posture? So is it constant reviews and audits? It's a really interesting question because I found this,
Yes, yeah. I'd say contracts as well, yeah.
Yeah, and it's like from a security point of view, sometimes you might know you can't trust this partner, but we have to work with them from a business point of view. So how do you deal with that?
Yeah, and I used to work in audits prior to the ISF in an IT information systems audit team, and we used to do a lot of audits. And what we were doing, purely be reviewing contracts, contract clauses, rather than taking an audit manual or anything, because this is, at the end of the day, what's holding you between the the main organization or the acquirer and your suppliers. So if you can't change your supplier because they're critical, because whatever reason, really understand what's in your contract, make sure it's applied, and if you're not sure, then you should look at it in any possible way and question your supplier, and sometimes maybe you need to revise the contract, and again you need to look at this with your procurement and your legal teams.
I'd say there's a bit of a dilemma there, right? So contracts, especially if you're resorting to legal means, that means there's probably an incident has already happened. We're going to go back to our contractual clause and say, right, this is any reimbursement we're owed. That doesn't stop an incident happening in the first place. So obviously having a contractual clause will hopefully provide some resilience if the supplier actually follows through. I'd say, for me, the key thing to understand here is, okay, if we know we can't change that supplier, there's only so much we can do in terms of contracts. We can understand their security posture as much as possible, but then would it come down to actually, okay, what can we do from an internal control point of view? If we know that, depending on who the supplier is, if they have access to systems and data, what are the internal controls we can put in place to make sure that it comes probably back to identity and access management, for example. Have they got access only to what they need, not widespread access through the organization? So can you apply that kind of segregation and controls to only provide suppliers what they need rather than too much open access? I think it's about kind of limiting the blast radius should something happen right at that point.
Yes, it's a very good point. Look at your internal controls as well as much as possible, with your suppliers.
But yeah, I think it's an interesting question because it just shows how thorny this question is. The issue is because it's very much wrapped up with what the business does. I'm not sure how many times you've seen a security team able to say we shouldn't sign that contract because we don't trust their security. Normally it's the business decision to go with a particular supplier, right? Security can have an impact, but it's not generally unless something's crazy risky. It's not generally the something that's going to say no to a contract, right? So we have to, from the security point of view, play with the hand you're dealt, right? In terms of the suppliers you work with.
A question for you, which, if you don't mind.
Yeah.
Do you want a difficult question or an easy question?
Let's go difficult. It's a Friday.
Okay. I've got it. So you mentioned at the start the three areas: geopolitics, AI, and cybercrime, right?
Yeah.
So what do you think is currently having the biggest impact on supply chain risk? AI, geopolitics, or cybercrime?
At the risk of weaseling out, they're all interconnected. I can't, much like supply chains are interconnected. You can't really disconnect a lot of them. Geopolitics and is having an impact on AI, and AI is impacting geopolitics. So when we think about how campaigns work, how jobs are being put at risk in some places, how the way of work is changing, that is going to have an impact on the kind of threats and the way that both cyber criminals and nation states will use cyber threats to target organizations. So I think AI is behind a lot of the change in the threat landscape, both on a kind of nation state level and the cyber criminal level. And of course, those two are related as well. We know cyber criminal organizations will often be working hand in hand or at arm's length from certain nation states. So it's really they're all kind of evolving at the same time, interlinking with each other. It's we try and separate them out into three kind of nicely addressable themes, but actually they're incredibly interlinked. One will not go without the other. I think if we think about what some nation states are doing at the moment, we know North Korea, for instance, is funding a lot of its economy through cybercrime, through ransomware. So again, if they can find if they can get into one supplier that opens up a ransomware attack to 60 others, why would you not go for it? And the same for even if you're not operating from a financial point of view, but you want to, if there's a nation state that wants to create as much disruption and kind of chaos in a rival without going into all-out kinetic warfare, then cyber is the way to do it. And again, if you can pick on one particular provider that has access to or sits behind a lot of critical infrastructure or banking systems or economic systems or physical IT, OT, they're going to be a target. So it just, I think it's and an AI will make those targets easier, or probably make it easier to address those targets. So they're all linked. At the same time, AI is also going to help us defend. Hopefully, AI-based controls will be required to kind of meet a lot of those threats. So yeah, it's all highly complex, but I think there's how long's a piece of string is probably the answer. But yeah, the final point I would say is we can talk about AI defenses. If we haven't got these basics in place, the people and the process, you understand who your suppliers are, what they're providing, how critical they are to your organization. Having all the AI tools in the world isn't going to reduce your risk, right? You kind of have to have those basics right first.
Right, so geopolitics, AI, or cyber. I guess from my point of view as well, it depends a little bit on where you operate as well, and then what type of business. If you're speaking to organizations, if you don't have too much exposure, because some clearly do not at the moment have massive exposure to geopolitical tension, right? Quite localized and business in Europe and somewhere in Europe, then you're probably verging more towards the AI stroke cybercrime, and equally if you have some operations towards the Middle East and these kind of regions, then you'd be maybe more impacted and towards the geopolitical side. It's a bit of a dial,
Certainly, yeah. And I guess the question for you then is will AI ultimately make it make it harder or easier to manage supply chain?
Should I start on this?
Well, yeah, either.
Yeah, I mean, I've been reading these days a lot about Mythos and all these AI tools that are supposed to discover so many vulnerabilities all at once, right? And of course, this really exemplifies really the or can help illustrate the answer to this question, because when you look at this and the talk around Mythos and all these tools, again, it goes both ways, right? It goes in ways that it's great because a tool like this could help my organization to identify a lot of more vulnerabilities suddenly, which I could patch and become more secure, and develop code that is secure, scan it through my AI tool, and then it finds all these important vulnerabilities. But of course, on the other side, we know that the bad guys will possibly have and already have access to very powerful tool that can help them discovering vulnerabilities, and organizations not always have the time to fix them. So it's a catch-22 situation, really, like with all these things in cybersecurity. The biggest advice here is that, again, follow the trends, follow the news, what's happening out there, and then you really have to increase cadence and the basics of security, again, like patching. We always say that, but also equally develop, securely. And I think that security has done a good job at really so far, at explaining the message that secure coding is extremely important. So I don't know. I hope to think that AI will help more than, because I'm always on the good side, more than help the profession to evolve in a more secure way. But of course, we know that it might be a little bit hard as well.
Yeah.
Any other views?
I was just going to add on to you take the optimist view, so I'll present the opposite pessimist view. When having talked about the the need to patch, etc., patch pad. Yes, that is good practice. The really insidious thing about some of these threats has been it's the patch itself that causes the incident, right? So if and we see this like with CrowdStrike, for instance, with SolarWinds as well. So if someone's able to get inside, a malicious attacker, whether an insider or someone who's hacking in and is able to essentially affect the patch that gets rolled out, then the patch itself is the vehicle for the incident. So it's that's there's no way of stopping that from if you're a customer of that particular supplier, right? It's then all about resilience. Like, how do we recover from that? How do we know that might happen? Go back to everything we've spoken about. Have we got that redundancy in place? Yeah, we're able to kind of move over quickly and recover quickly.
Yeah, I think I sit on the fence with this one, where I can see it getting both better and worse at the same time. Like, it kind of propels security teams to kind of enhancing their security processes, but at the exact same time, the same thing's happening for the criminal groups. So it's kind of like a race over who can utilize it best. So I think, at least in the short term, we're going to see both of those things be true at the same time.
Yeah. So the answer is go back to the basics. Yeah, to everything we've talked about today, I think, is you've got to get that kind of risk-based approach in place, right? Cool.
Yeah. Right. Any more questions? Should we take one more? Last one.
Not sure we've got any further from the audience.
Okay. Just
yeah.
conscious it's Friday, and then we'll have some good weather here in the UK, right? So some of the listeners probably want to get a few minutes back. So shall we wrap up for now? Any final message from anyone? So here are our contact details. Of course, we're always available to our ISF members, colleagues, and even if you're not ISF member, feel free to reach out to us.
Yep, always happy to talk. As I say, it's this will be an ongoing subject of discussion, and yeah, obviously an ongoing risk, as we pointed out. So yeah, any questions to follow up, please do get in touch.
Cool. Francesca, do you want to say anything final?
Just same as Rich, and from what we've covered in the presentation today, I think focusing on the basics is most important. And if there are any questions or discussions, please reach out to any of us afterwards. We'd be happy to keep this conversation going.
Thank you. Let's wrap up for now. And so thank you again very much to our listeners, attendees, for insightful questions, interesting questions. And if we didn't get to your question, if you have something that comes to your mind at the end of the session, feel free to reach out. Our contact details are on the screen now. And as always, we look forward to continuing the conversation with our members on ISF Live. If you're not yet part of our community, head to the attachments section below to learn more. While you're here, please make sure you leave us a feedback rating. Any comments, it helps us improve and give you some sessions like we did today, and anything you'd like to see from us. We really appreciate your thoughts. Right, thank you very much, and thanks Rich, thanks Francesca, and then we'll hope to see you soon, and have a good rest of the day, everyone. Thank you.
Thanks all.
Thank you. Goodbye.